Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Garden Well, Eat Well. For gardeners everywhere, there's this one horrible weed that we all absolutely hate, and I'm going to show you what you can do about it. Thistles. So let's get started. Every year starts the same way. You've been looking out that window for weeks, and finally you see those bright spring colors. You get all excited because you have to get out there and start working that garden. It's usually way too early though to start putting any plants in the ground. But for the weeds, it's the best time to start getting a foothold. And if you're not careful, there's one particular weed that can take over your garden very easily. It's this creeping thistle. It goes by many names, but it's mostly known as Canada Thistle, although I really don't know why. This weed never started in Canada. It actually came over from Europe centuries ago, and today it's now one of the worst invasive weeds you'll find around the world. In many areas, it's even illegal to let it grow wild on your own property. Just so you know which one I'm talking about, it's the perennial that can grow about 5 feet high, or roughly 1.5 meters. As it grows, it'll get these extremely sharp spines all over its stem and around the edges of its leaves. And through the summer, they'll actually get harder and sharper and painful, so you really have to watch yourself. But that's not even the worst part. Thistles have these terrible roots that are practically impossible to remove completely. They go deep, straight down and over a foot sometimes, and then they turn, sending up new shoots every few inches. And the older the plant gets, the deeper and farther these roots go. So when you start with one plant and you ignore it, there's every chance you'll end up with a huge patch of them. Not only are their roots a nuisance, but later in the year, it'll start putting out a lot of flowers. These are typically different shades of purple, and they do give your garden a little color, but you definitely need to get rid of them. They can produce about 1,000 seeds per plant. And since they have a lot of fluff on them, they'll ride the wind and can blow for miles. So we have a ton to worry about when it comes to fighting this weed. Obviously, we need to get rid of them. But what's the best way? I try to garden organically as much as I can. So if you're like me, you stay away from any chemical herbicides. You don't want to upset the natural balance by introducing any toxins or poisons that could hurt the bees or other pollinators or even yourself. And you want to protect what's happening down in the soil. So before you plant your garden, you want those weeds gone. The best method, I think, is to simply just dig them out, getting rid of every bit of root you can find. I've always had the best success in early to mid-spring. Last year's foliage has all died back. The soil is moist and very easy to work with. This way the roots can separate better when you remove them. If you wait until the summer, the soil will be drier and will turn hard, encasing the roots, especially if your garden has a lot of clay. And since the roots are pretty fragile, they'll end up snapping and breaking into pieces, so it's a real problem. Another reason I remove them in the spring is that they're just emerging, or at least they're pretty small, and at this point you can handle them with little risk as those sharp spines haven't fully developed and aren't dangerous. Yet, that is. Later in the summer and fall, the weeds will have matured and be much larger. So when they're like this, there's no way you can handle them and get them under the ground unless you have gloves on. Even when they're small, you can't just pull them out of the ground by hand. The roots go too deep. If you try, they'll just break right off. You need to work them out with a proper tool. So which one is best? You don't want to use a shovel. It'll slice through the roots and leave a lot of pieces in the ground, all of which can reroot and grow into brand new plants. On the other hand, I really like using the stirrup hoe. It's the tool I use the most everywhere in the garden. But it's really meant to work on the shallow weeds. Depending on how you angle it, it can cut roots up to 3 inches down. But that's nowhere near deep enough for thistles. You could try a hand claw. That will get you a little deeper, if you work at it. But again, it will just tear the roots into pieces, so not a good choice. I wouldn't even bother with a garden rake. The weeds just slide through between the teeth. None of these tools do the trick. The best one I found to use, though, is a spading fork, and I'll show you why. Let's try digging some out. Okay, so let's start by pushing the fork down as deep as we can. First thing is to just go around the plant and break up the soil a bit. Just want to do this a few times, working it back and forth to start loosening the ground. This will help to pull the weeds out, especially if the roots go deep. You really don't need to worry about cutting the roots with this technique. We're just poking through them, we're not going to be slicing them up. Do this for a bit, and then you can start testing if they'll come out. Just tug on the stem, but gently though. If it's loose, slowly pull it out. Here, you can get a hint at how extensive these roots can get. They've stopped going down to this point, but now they're branching out. The soil is perfect, just enough moisture to make it crumbly. Just needs a little convincing to drop away from the roots. But this is exactly what you want. This looks pretty good. I think we dug deep enough and we're going to get the whole plant. So that's all the roots. I didn't see any other pieces. I'm very happy with this. Let's go to a different spot and try another one. Now this bed isn't part of my regular vegetable garden. It was shaded by an old cedar that we had to take out. But the thistles have grown all through this spot. These may be more difficult to take out because the roots from the cedar will probably get in the way. But the same technique goes. We have to get the soil as loose as possible. There are a lot of them, but just go systematically and start removing them one by one. This is why the bed is so full. The roots can travel quite a ways. And as they grow, they'll cross and twist around each other, getting very tangled. Sometimes the roots will go only an inch or two before they send up a shoot. Sometimes it's much further. But you never have to worry about actually touching these with your bare hand. Not even when they get fully mature. There are no spines under the ground, so they're completely safe to handle. After pulling them out, you also want to check through what you dug to see if you left any pieces behind. Well, we got a few good examples here, especially with these long-running roots. And that's why we hate them so much. Once you're done digging them out, you need to finally dispose of them. Normally, you would just throw them right onto your compost pile. But if you then cover them up, while the roots are still alive, they will definitely keep growing and spread all through the pile. This is what I mean. Here's an example where the compost has been left sitting for more than a year, and the thistles have completely taken over. And then, when you want to use this compost and put it back in your garden, pieces of live root will end up going everywhere, and you'll just keep the cycle going. The best way is to lay them out in the sun, or on top of your compost, to totally dry out, and then you can mix them in. This way they'll be completely dead and shouldn't give you any more trouble. If you really want to get rid of them quickly, you could bag them up and toss them in the garbage, or throw them in the fire. But composting is the most environmentally friendly. After you've done all that digging and gotten rid of most of the roots, you want to maintain the area so you don't have to do that again. It was a lot of work. So you always need to keep prevention in the back of your mind. You probably left a few pieces in the ground, but they're pretty weakened now. Mulch is very effective as a general weed control, usually, but it won't work for thistles that already have roots in the ground. You can add the mulch as thick as you want. It will not stop these stems from pushing up through it. An easier way to keep the thistles in check is by just watching that area every week, and if you see any new sprouts, Simply cut them below the surface using a knife, or take them out with your hoe. This will force the roots to keep trying to send up new stems. If you continue cutting them like this when they're small, the remaining roots won't have a chance to strengthen, and after a while they'll just give up. Also, since the seeds can travel quite far, it's absolutely vital that you at least cut down the plant once you see it producing flowers. Stopping those seeds from getting loose will make sure the rest of your garden stays safe, and I'm sure your neighbors will be grateful too. Again, talking about prevention and avoiding any injuries, I want to remind you to wear your gloves if you have to handle these larger thistles. Ow!
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Pardon me. I guess there is a reason why they call it Canada Thistle. So now I hope you know a little bit more about how thistles grow and what to do about them. If you found this video useful and informative, please help me out by giving me a thumbs up, share it with all your gardening friends, and press that subscribe button. Thanks very much for watching. When you garden well, you'll always eat well.